and nobody really micromanaged me. So I was really lucky. And I think that was part of why the guys were successful. And I think another part was they really kind of gelled as a team and pushed and pulled off each other and supported each other. And, in a sport like ski racing where, at the end of the day, it's you against the clock, I think a lot of people don't realize the strength that the team bond can actually bring.
Hello, and welcome to episode number 73 of the Rose Bros podcast. This episode, we are joined by Olympic and World Cup ski racing coach Johno McBride. Johno is perhaps best known for his time as Bode Miller's coach during his 2002 Olympic medal performance and 2005/2008 overall World Cup victories. During this period, Johno also coached Daron Rahlves to 12 World Cup wins. In addition, Johno has coached the Canadian national ski team, Paralympic athletes, and has coached at different levels all the way down to the club, where he is currently coaching at the Aspen Valley Ski Club today. Originally from Aspen, Colorado, Johno grew up skiing, playing hockey, and enjoying the outdoors. We sat down for a smooth cup of Rose Bros coffee and discussed what it takes to win, the importance of a team, the difference between Canadian and U.S. ski racing programs, earning respect, dealing with egos, bad advice, and a lot more. Enjoy! Also, this week's podcast was brought to you by A1 Web Development. Looking for a new website or e-commerce storefront? A1 can help launch your business online through Amazon, Shopify, Walmart, or eBay to access millions of new customers. Check out a1dev.ca today for more details on how you can grow your business.
Yeah.
How'd you get into ski racing?
Well, I was a ski racer. I started in this club when I was young, when I was 7. Just after school, we'd go and ride the rope tow. And then at night, we'd play hockey. That was just kind of what we did as kids in Aspen.
Did you race till you were a teenager then, I think I read? Or?
I raced and I made the development team when I was 16. And that was about the time I was in high school, just going into high school. And then I went to college. I went to UVM and I raced for UVM. And then I came back and got into coaching at the club. Ski racing was really a seasonal sport when I was a kid. People weren't doing a lot of skiing in the summer and off season. We were doing other sports. But yeah, I made the development team and I did a couple camps with the U.S. ski team in Colorado and California. Did some conditioning camp with them. Then I ended up racing in UVM in Vermont. After I got back from college, I started coaching at the club, started coaching young kids, and just felt like a nice way to give back. Still love the sport. And one thing led to another, and my roommate from college asked me if I would come and coach a hockey skating clinic. So I did that for the national team. After that, they asked me if I'd come and coach a camp, which I did. And then they asked me if I'd be willing to come and work with the guys. And I said, if they were willing to have me around, I would consider it. And that's kind of how it started, working with the national team. And then long history with the national team. Started with the technical team and then moved into the speed team. Then I worked for Bodhi on his own for Team America. And then after that, I took a year off and I went and worked for the disabled team, U.S. disabled team, which was really interesting and eye-opening. And then I got brought back into the team for a year, coaching the combined team. Then I got hired to work for Canada, became their head coach on the speed team. And I came back to the U.S. team for a few years. And now I'm back at the club in Aspen. Lots of moving and grooving.
Did you always want to be a ski coach, or did it just kind of evolve?
I think it kind of evolved. I've always loved the sport. I still love the sport. I still love skiing. I just sort of dug my teeth into it, and one thing led to another. I always had pretty good balance in I guess when I was younger, I ran my own construction business. So that was really until I started working for the national team year round. And so I always had kind of seasonal stuff, even when I first started ski coaching, I was working construction when I wasn't doing that. And then I kind of ran that into my career with the U.S. ski team. And at that time, it just became too much to try and do seasonal work. So that was about the time I started working full time in the ski world.
Did you do physio in school or sports?
I did I learned the physical training side of skiing through the USOC. I went and spent a lot of time at the USOC in Colorado Springs. And that was early on in my career with the US Ski Team. I spent quite a bit of time doing that and then working with the sports science directors at US Skiing. So for many, many years, I wrote all the conditioning programs for the guys and then implemented them. So that was part of my role. In fact, at one point, I was the head conditioning coach for the men's ski team and the head coach. Mm-hmm. And that was a lot.
Do you ever think you'd end up one of the most successful U.S. ski coaches in all time?
Not really. Just enjoyed it. And I was lucky enough to be it in a time when people above me, people that were higher up in the ski team, gave me the ability to hire the people I wanted and run the program the way I wanted. And I was very sort of athlete driven. So it was a lot of sit downs with the athletes and talking about, what do you need and how you're going to get there and what's going to make their team. I always kind of used that as a part of the approach, and nobody really micromanaged me. So I was really lucky. And I think that was part of why the guys were successful. And I think another part was they really kind of gelled as a team and pushed and pulled off each other and supported each other. And, in a sport like ski racing where, at the end of the day, it's you against the clock. I think a lot of people don't realize the strength that the team bond can actually bring, especially if you're an American athlete spending a majority of your time in Europe or a Canadian athlete doing the same. That sort of brotherhood of supporting each other goes a long ways, even in individual sport. And I think that's why, I think that's a small part of the reason that teams I was with were successful. They supported each other.
When you took over the head coaching jobs and whatnot, did you approach it differently than coaches had in the past? Did you make a bunch of big changes?
Yeah, I would say I've definitely made some changes. I think for me, it was always about the people and being around people that you want to be around and people that if somebody drops the ball, somebody's going to pick it up. And it's not about one guy being in charge and one guy having a very specific role. I always approached it as a team from start to finish, whether that was setting up the timer or sharing ideas about video or sharing ideas about where we should plan our next camp or conditioning ideas or all that kind of thing. I think the team had come from an area where, at least prior to me, the guy who ran the show was not a good communicator. He didn't empower the people around him. It was very much everyone had their very specific role, and that was it. There was no team feel, and I think it carried over to the athletes. Nobody gave a shit about each other, and everyone was kind of out to get each other, and in the end, it kind of hurt everyone. And so I think, I definitely made some changes and changed the way I held guys accountable, and I changed the way I kind of looked at the sport in terms of the science of it. I'm kind of a big believer in looking at, I think, paying attention to the small details, technically and tactically, and keeping track of them, making sure athletes are accountable to that. And so I think that was all different than when I started and from the people that were in front of me that I watched. So I would say, yes, I did change some things and changed the way we looked at the sport a little bit. I think day to day, when you go out on the hill and you set a course and you shoot some video and you put up the timer, it doesn't look that much different from the outside. But I think the way you meet with athletes and the way you set goals with athletes and the way you hold them accountable and the way you create a framework for how you want to be a team and follow through with that can be very different.
Where did you learn that skill? Was that something you kind of knew intuitively, or how did you pick up on that?
That's a good question. I think I learned a lot through sport as an athlete. I was lucky enough to have a few really good coaches, and I had a lot of really shitty coaches. Mm-hmm. And I think I learned a couple things. One, I think through my own sport, I learned that creating a framework of what expectations are is really important and holding people accountable to that. And then the other part of it is you can be a professional and you can have a good time and you can enjoy the process. And, to be a professional, you don't have to be an asshole. And I think creating the relationships, like the best coaches I ever had were ones that I actually had a relationship with. I trusted them. They trusted me. It was a give and take relationship. And so when I got into coaching, I recognized those pieces of the puzzle and just tried to implement that in my own philosophy.
Probably most known for at this time with Bode Miller, 2005, 2008, when he won the World Cup title and everything else. How did you meet Bode?
Well, Bode came onto the team when I was early on. I think we came on in the first year together. And so I knew him for a long time, and he eventually became part of my group. So he started off on the technical side. Mm-hmm. And I started off on the technical side, so I knew him. His very first year on the ski team, he came and had Thanksgiving at our house because he was from the East Coast, and we were here in Copper Mountain, and he had nowhere to go. And so he just came with me. We got to know each other, and I always recognized his talent from the get-go and knew that he had, obviously, things to learn and kind of learn pieces to the puzzle to put it all together. But he eventually ended up becoming a part of my group that I was managing. And so we spent a lot of time together. Honestly, I was pretty hard on him because I always had pretty high expectations for him, maybe even higher than he did for himself. But I think because of that, we created a relationship that was pretty healthy and it was professional. He knew I was going to push on him, and he was very professional in terms of our relationship. We didn't always agree on things, but we could agree to disagree and move forward and share our views. And, he could be super hard-headed, but I think we found a place where we could interact and exchange and support each other in a way that was productive. So it's become a long relationship. Still have it going. We still talk quite a bit.
Did you see the talent right from the beginning, or did it take time to kind of gel and mold and emerge as a great skier?
No, I saw it right away. I saw it right away. He's just one of those guys that, he's not like everybody else. You can tell that he has a feel for things. He has, extraordinary balance. He has a sense of timing that's amazing. And he has the ability to sort of mentally get in a place that nothing will get in his way. Nothing will distract him. And so I think you combine all those pieces of the puzzle and figure out the tactical piece and how to race smart, how to use your brain, when and where to take risks. And once he started to figure out all that, history is pretty good record of it. He was amazing. He had the ability to win, and he did win in every discipline. And I think he probably could have been more dominant. But at the end of the day, like I said earlier, my goals for him were not necessarily the same as his own goals. So you learn a lot about people when you go through that process.
When you're dealing with a champion like that, did you have to kind of let go of the reins, or did you take a hands-on approach to someone like that? How did you balance the two aspects of?
When you work with somebody that's the best, one of the best in the world, obviously I'm not going to go out and demonstrate for him. Mm-hmm. So you recognize that you learn how to step back and look at the picture a little bit more scientifically, and where are things falling apart, or where can they be better? How can you manage your life in a way that you can be at your A game when you need to be? How do you balance your schedule, your calendar, how you work, when you rest? Mm-hmm. How do you set up training situations that will actually be a teaching, learning environment for him, even if he's not aware of it? So those are the kind of things you step back and try and figure out. And with a guy like Bode and a task of trying to bring home the overall, and it's not easy, because at the end of the light, you're looking at how do you win, right? Or how do you be near winning as much as you can to score enough points to win the overall. Mm-hmm. So it's complex, right? And then there's all sorts of other pieces of the puzzle, making sure you get your equipment right. And so there was, on a year like that with Bode, when he won the overall, there's an enormous amount of time spent testing equipment and trying to fine tune the gear so that wasn't a piece of the puzzle that was holding back.
I remember I rode up the lift with him in Chile one year, and he looked down at my skis and told me he'd designed them a few years ago because they were old at the time. It was kind of an insight into how much he put into designing skis and testing and all the process. And I was a teenager at the time. I couldn't believe it.
Oh yeah. I mean, he's a very intuitive guy and always was very instrumental, I think, in not only designing his own equipment, but testing of equipment and, a very, I would say, a different feeling for his gear than many, many people. I remember times he'd put on a pair of skis and literally slide them down the snow or take 2 turns and be like, nope, these aren't them.
Right.
So not many people have that kind of, I think, intuition. And I think at times it probably even got in his way where that became too much of the focus. But ultimately, he was, I would say, very tuned into his own equipment and knew what he wanted and knew how to make it feel the way he wanted to feel in order for him to perform at his highest level.
You were an accomplished coach and already had success before you started coaching with Bodhi. Was it hard to balance your opinions and your demands with someone like that, who, especially when you guys started winning, and it would have been hard to, who's right?
Yeah. I don't think, not really. It wasn't about me. Okay. When you get into coaching, it's about the athletes you're with, and it was very different for me to be with one athlete. I would never have put myself in that situation had it not been him hiring me. Mm-hmm. I've never worked privately as a coach where a parent hired me. I never had interest in that. But when he reached out to me to do that job and to run the team for him, it was an interesting process for sure. I had a lot of demands.
Yeah, exactly.
And basically gave him a list and said, here's, if you're willing to do this, I will take the job on. And he did, to his credit. And some of them were not easy demands, including not drinking.
Right.
But yeah, he was very professional in that regard. And that was cool. But no, it was never about me trying to toot my own horn about being his coach. Mm-hmm. It was more trying to figure out how he could be as dominant as possible. And so for me, that was a constant battle, and I always felt like it could be better. So I was always trying to figure out how it could be better and how we could become more dominant across the board in different disciplines. And so even though we agreed to disagree on many, many times, I think in the end, we usually figured out how to work together and hopefully how to support each other.
You also coached Daron Rahlves, and I read, I think online, that at one point, may not be right, he'd won a race or won a downhill, and you were giving him feedback, and you'd said, okay, what about next weekend? Because it was Kitzbühel, I think. The focus is always on getting better, and you were already looking towards the next race, the next weekend with Daron Rahlves. Is that a true story?
Yep, that is a true story. That is a true story, and I think when you look back on your career, there's always times when you can, I guess, reflect. And I feel like I probably didn't take enough time to celebrate with guys, not necessarily go party, but just to celebrate the moment of performing at a high level. But I do think I kept people on track with bigger picture goals and trying to keep engaged in the moment of what it takes to continue to win. Mm-hmm. And I think that's challenging, and it's a fine edge when you're at that point where you're a contender to win. You can fall off that thin edge easily, and then you're searching again. And so I was always pretty hard on guys, even when they were winning and performing well, about staying and keeping that edge and trying to keep in that mental zone and that place where we're really paying attention to details and making sure that as we moved into the next race and thinking of the season as a whole or the big events that might be coming up, that we can hopefully be ready.
Mm-hmm. When you guys started to win and have success, was there a moment you realized that all of a sudden you were the best in the world, and you kind of had that moment, you looked around and realized that?
No, I never really had that. I think one of the greatest moments for me coaching, I mean, I had lots, but some of the best moments for me coaching was when the whole team came together. Mm-hmm. And when I saw the guys that were in the lower level of the team perform at a higher level, and the top guys perform at the level they could. But then when it all starts feeling like everyone's pulling and pushing and supporting each other, and it's bringing up the level of the whole squad, that's a really rewarding time. And those happened a number of times, not only with the U.S., but with the Canadian team as well. And man, those feel good. Those are really feel good moments for me as the guy that's kind of in charge of the team.
Mm-hmm. I know funding is also a big part of the equation, and especially in Canada, often the money's kind of drying up, or it seems to be these days. Did you have the same issue in the U.S.? I guess not with Bodhi, but maybe earlier on?
Yeah, we had some interesting times. I would say for sure we had interesting times within the team. There was times when I remember athletes were buying their own tickets to go to camps, and I remember they asked the team, everyone was going to take pay cuts. Mm-hmm. I remember that. I remember when the athletes paid for a majority of their own programming fees. And I think all that adds stress to the whole equation for sure. And it creates a dynamic that's maybe not that healthy within a national team when you have, I guess like any organization, when you have people at the top that are making big money, and then people that are scrapping along making not very much money in a profession that's not always easy. You're on the road a lot, and there's no 9 to 5 about being a ski racing coach. Mm-hmm. When you're in Europe, you're on the clock all the time. Somebody needs to get their boots done at 10 at night. You go fix their boots. Mm-hmm. And so I think those pieces of the puzzle are hard. And it's unfortunate when teams and national governing bodies don't have enough money to support the vision and support the people to create the programming, because in the end, it will affect the athletes. Mm-hmm. There's no doubt about it. And I think it's real. It's unfortunate. The sport requires a lot of money and it's very expensive, but it is real. Mm-hmm. If you're driving an F1 car and you're not putting in the research and development and have a car that's, can be competitive, you're not going to go win races. And there are corollaries to, mm-hmm. How your training is, how your equipment is, how your staff is. All those pieces of the puzzle in an individual sport are still important. So yeah, it's a bummer. The money piece is a bummer.
Did you feel that burden kind of lift when you guys were having success with Daron Rahlves and Bode Miller and things were going really well?
Yeah, you do. It's like success breeds excitement, and excitement breeds people want to get involved, and people want to get involved and tie their name to success is basically what it boils down to.
Sure.
And so there's a lot of people that probably have money and that are willing to, they'd love to tie that into their own ego and their own vision of themselves as being part of the equation. So yeah, it seems like when teams do well, it's easier to raise money. And, when you get in a slump and things are shitty and you don't have money, you don't have sponsors, and you might not have the leadership that is going to help you turn that around. Boy, it can be tough times for national teams. Real tough times.
You coached in Canada too at the national level. Did you notice a difference in funding between Canada and the U.S. programs?
Not really, honestly. I guess the one piece that was different and interesting in Canada is, I love that the provinces were actually supporting the athletes, even though it's not a lot of money. You get your check as a national team athlete from wherever you're from. I thought that was really cool. Just a great support piece for the developing athletes coming into the national team. I think the Own the Podium is a whole nother piece of the puzzle that we don't really have in the States. I think Own the Podium is good and bad. It's great because it can help the highest level athletes get more, but it can also splinter a team if the team isn't careful. because it's only focused at the highest level athletes and only those athletes that are potentially going to be medal winners. And so, is that worth putting a lot of time and energy into that at the expense of the rest of the athletes? I don't know. But that's just something I felt and noticed.
The U.S. has had tons of success throughout the years, multiple world championships, all the medals, basically won everything. But Canada maybe hasn't had that success at times. Have you noticed differences in the programs? Is it population to draw on? Is it money? What do you think the difference is?
I think, these are good questions. They're hard to answer. I know my time in Canada, there was a time when I was in Canada when the group that I was with was very sort of gelled and working together and supported each other, and they were talented. And so you had this core group that was finding success, and it was building momentum on the speed team. And I think that population, like through the time I was there, some of them fell off and hurt themselves, and the next generation never really came in to fill those seats. And I don't really have the answer for that. I just know that there was a time when that core group of athletes that I was working with was very supportive. They were good buds, and they were all talented, and they were scoring points on the World Cup, and they were making things happen, and they started winning. And it was pretty exciting.
Is that like the Manny's group and whatnot?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Manny and Jan and Frankie Bork and that whole gang. Those guys were good skiers. And then, Benny Thompson came into the mix.
Yeah.
I was a part of bringing Benny in, and he found some success, which was really cool. But there wasn't a lot of, new blood coming into the team in that time, that 4-year span that I was there. So as that core group started to break down and get beat up and retire, there wasn't a lot of filling those seats going on. And I don't really have the answers for that, whether it was just a lull in the population. I mean, I think in this sport, you recognize there's times when really talented athletes come through, like certain birth years, and there's times when they don't. And we as coaches have no control over that. What we do have control over is the programming we provide for the kids that are there. Hopefully you get kids that are talented enough to perform, but it doesn't always happen.
When you were in Canada, there was no big holes in the program that you saw, I guess, that there was lacking compared to the U.S.?
I guess my only question, without not knowing, would be how the development program was building at that time. How they were building athletes to grooming them to be World Cup athletes. I wasn't a part of that piece of the puzzle. I just don't know. I don't know if maybe Canada didn't do as good a job in that kind of rebuilding phase at that time, or maybe there just wasn't a population of athletes at that time that was swinging through. But it's always an interesting concern of the sport. Even now, what's the next generation of speed skiers in the United States, men and women coming up? It's not a lot. And why? I don't really know. I don't really. But there's all sorts of pieces of the puzzle. I think sometimes in this country, speed skiing gets sort of relegated as, you learn speed after you learn how to ski slalom and GS. And I don't agree with that. I think speed skiing is a skill like anything else. And, the more you learn the basics and the fundamentals of it, even at a younger age, the more it'll carry through and be something that you can do better later. You can't just be a great slalom skier and then all of a sudden put on a pair of long skis and be a good glider. They're totally different skill sets. They're different mindsets. And, for us as Americans or Canadians to have a pipeline that develops young speed skiers to the point where they're getting the skills and the experience needed to compete at the World Cup. I mean, there needs to be programming in place to do that. And I think it's becoming more and more rare from my perspective.
Was there a common trend or training program that you noticed lead to success in the case of Bode or Lindsey Vonn or Michaela or any of the Daron Rahlves? Did they have a common theme?
Well, I think it's easy to pick out athletes like those because they're sort of exceptions.
Mm-hmm.
Very talented. They're hard workers. They're the phenoms, the Michaelas that come along. So it's hard to make, I guess, draw a lot of parallels from the best skiers.
It's easy to look back and paint a narrative too, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I think it's hard to do that. I think, it's an interesting question. What makes each one of them great? I mean, part of it is talent, right? You don't always get athletes with that kind of talent and drive and mental strength and everything else come along. So I don't know if there's anything specific that jumps out at me with those. I can tell you Daron Rahlves is one of the hardest working guys I ever saw.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe not as gifted naturally as an athlete as some of the others, but a workhorse and no fear at all, like huge set of cojones. So that was a piece of the puzzle for him. And everyone comes at it from a little different angle, I think, but I don't really have, I think the philosophy of development for speed skiing is a really important piece of the puzzle for America and Canada. Hopefully I'm not going off on too much of a tangent, but I think
not at all.
You can't expect to have great speed skiers if you don't have a program that develops them. Mm-hmm. And sort of a big picture view of when you're 10 years old, what do you do when you put on a pair of long skis, and how do you learn some of the skills to be a glider, or learn to go through terrain, or learn how to jump? And then how do you keep that going? And maybe you're from a program that you can't set a full length downhill, but how do you still manage to train some speed element skills and learn the skills, the pieces of the puzzle? And I think that's fallen apart a lot. I think there's a lot of people that have just sort of shifted their vision to, hey, it's more expensive, it's more difficult to train, fewer clubs do it. I think national teams maybe don't even take as much stock into a kid that's a good downhiller that's not a good slalom skier. And then you look at families thinking about the cost, and then they see the avenue of potentially going to college and getting it paid for and getting an education. And probably a lot of families are like, man, seems like a better track. When in reality, and then you hear silly things like people saying, well, it's easier to get on the speed team than it is on the tech team. Well, that's not really true. There might be fewer people racing downhill than there are slalom in the world. That doesn't mean it's easier. It's a very difficult, unique skill, and takes a lot of special traits to be great at it. So I think those are kind of like big picture stuff that are really important, stuff that I still think about here in the U.S. I'm obviously here in the U.S., so I'm not thinking about it as much in Canada, but I know there's a parallel there. And I know that's going to be an important piece for the Canadians to have, the crazy Canuck downhill gang again.
Yeah.
They're going to have support from the lower end of, how do you get a group of guys that are going to be those guys again?
In Canada, probably in the US a little bit, ski racing isn't exactly a pro sport where if you make it, you're guaranteed $1 million a year, more or less. What do you tell kids when they're kind of on the way up, thinking about career and the opportunity cost? Do you just say, if you love the sport, keep going, or do you kind of weigh it with how you're going to pay the bills is down the line? What do you tell them?
Well, I think honestly, ski racing in general is one of those sports where hopefully you're doing it because you love it. And I think there's nothing more rewarding than, ripping down a mountain, especially in speed, at kind of on the edge of destruction and sort of looking the bull in the eye. I think that's a pretty rewarding life if you can figure out how to do it. I don't think there's that many guys that are doing it for the money. I think ski racing's a very unique sport in that there's a very small percentage of the top guys that are making good money, and girls. And, you could be 30th in the world or 25th in the world, and, you're making, I don't even know, maybe you make $50,000 a year.
Yeah, barely getting by.
So it's not a lot. But I think there's not a lot of people that are 25th in the world either that are quitting because they're looking at the picture saying, hey, I can't make enough money to do this. They're looking at all the different avenues that how they can become 15th in the world and then maybe make a little bit better living. I don't think it's right. I don't know. I mean, it's a bummer that it's not set up more like the NHL, where you're a rookie on the NHL and you made the squad and you make, I don't know what the minimum is now, but I imagine those guys make $300,000 a year, and they might even be riding the pine a little bit, sort of learning the systems and learning how to get engaged in the team. But, it's money that you could make a living on and pay a mortgage. If you're making $50,000 and you're 20 years old as a ski racer, it's pretty tough.
Mm-hmm. When you're building the U.S. program and looking around, do you look towards other countries like Austria and their programs and their success, or do you focus more on your own world and building it the best you can here?
I think you always look. I mean, I always was looking. I'm always looking over my shoulder at what other people are doing, not necessarily because I'm afraid I'm not doing the right thing, but more because I think I might be able to learn something. I probably learned more from the Norwegians. They run a smaller program. The Austrians are more like factory. They have a shit ton of people and a shit ton of money, and they just roll people in, and if you don't fit the mold, then you're out the door kind of deal, a little bit more. But Norway is small programming. They don't name a lot of people to their teams. They have a very good sports science program driven by a guy I know well that used to work for U.S. Skiing. So easy to sort of communicate and assess what he's up to and learn from him. I think they're really good with the details, equipment, downhill suits, and they're good with team. They understand the concept that a small group of guys can support each other and push each other to be better as individuals. And I think they've always been a pretty good team, a team to watch. They've never been a huge team. They've had a lot of success. So I think for me, they were always a team I kind of paid attention to. And for many years, I made a real effort to train with them and make them training partners. So I did that with the U.S. And then when I came to Canada, they became our training partners. I asked them to be our training partners. So spent quite a bit of time around those guys, and they're top shelf. And I think there's other teams too. I mean, I bring them up just because I was probably the closest with those guys, but the French technical team, for example, I mean, those guys have been on a tear and doing some great things. And, I think they're well coached and they have a good progression, and they have young guys that sort of continually develop and fill in. And so all that's kind of fun to watch. So yes, I always paid attention to other teams and hopefully learned something.
Money isn't the answer to things always. Ski racing is a team's problems, but do you think if you were given $100 million tomorrow to run a national team, that would solve all your problems, or does it take more than just money?
Oh, I think it takes a lot more than money.
Yeah.
I mean, it takes good people, number one. You can do a lot more with good people than you can do with just money,
right?
In my opinion. I think money is a great tool. It's a great tool for research and development. I go back to looking at like F1, the companies that are able to get their cars tuned to a place that's better and faster than the next guy. That's an advantage, or more aerodynamic or whatever. I mean, that would be like our suits, for example, or our helmets, or, how do you make your equipment the slipperiest through the air to give yourself an advantage? Money can be a tool to get you to the right place to train. It can be a tool to prepare a hill so that it's like a World Cup venue, so that you're actually testing your equipment on the same kind of snow. So money is a great tool, but I don't think it's everything. I think there's the connection piece of a coach and an athlete, which is the invaluable part. How coaches and athletes interact, how they hold each other accountable, how they learn new skills. I think everyone at the highest level is very talented. They're strong. They all want to win. So they have all these great traits that are very similar. And then there's this small slice of how you're going to go above and beyond that. And I think for me, that's the mental piece. And the mental piece is very involved with how you work with your athletes. How do you instill confidence in an athlete? How do you teach them new skills? How do you instill change? All those are sort of, I would say, subtle skills that involve people. And I think though that, in my mind, is probably more important than just having money.
Did you find it hard to balance kind of being tough on athletes and really driving them and then having that kind of Zen approach where you really get the best out of them and you motivate them?
Yeah, I think it's always a challenge. I think it's always a balance, like you said. I think underneath all of it, I think most people desire to have structure, a certain amount of structure, and I think they desire to have a framework of what's acceptable, and they want to know where the line is. What can you do and what can you not do? And I think when that becomes gray, people can be total fuck-ups, and because they don't know. But I think that's part of a coach's job is figuring out, what is the framework for how you need to operate as an individual and how we need to operate as a team to be the most effective. And I think that's maybe some of the hardest things that coaches can do is how do you create that balance between what's important for you to make the next step to reach your potential? How do you balance that with having a good time, feeling good about the people you're around, working as hard as you need, and mentally finding the confidence you need to step on the gas pedal when it gets scary and gnarly and unknown.
Respect. How did you get the respect of your athletes? Was it always there? Was it kind of just the way you are, or did you have to earn it?
I think everyone has to earn it, is my opinion. You live and learn and you make mistakes, and athletes make mistakes. And I think part of it is being willing to, part of it in my experience is you got to be willing to put yourself out there. And you got to be willing to, me as a coach, I've got to be willing to put myself out there and be completely honest and be true to myself and be true to them and be willing to make a mistake and own up to it. Mm-hmm. As well as they do, they need to do the same. And I think ultimately when you spend enough time with people and you understand that you have similar visions and similar goals, and I think it doesn't take long for athletes that are around me to realize that I'm a pretty fucking competitive person and mm-hmm. I don't want to be second place. Mm-hmm. And so that's the way I kind of lead my own life. And I think that can be, when they know that can change the way they operate too. I'm not saying that makes them competitive, but I think I wear most of my world on my sleeve. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's pretty easy for people to know who I am and how I operate, what's important to me. And so I think that's probably the manner in which I've been able to get respect from them. And I would never demand respect from anybody. I would want to earn it.
Was it hard to be super competitive and wear that on your sleeve and but at the same time kind of keep relaxed and not go crazy? Was that a skill you had to learn?
Yeah, I guess you want to bring home the bacon, and when you're a coach, you're removed, right? You can only control certain little tiny pieces of the puzzle. And at the end, I have so little control over all the parts of another athlete. You just hope you do what you can for those little things you can control, helping somebody get in a good mindset or helping somebody understand maybe a section of a course that if they can execute it in a way maybe differently than they looked at it, that they could potentially be faster. Mm-hmm. I think, I think it's hard. That's always hard, if you're a coach, and it's not the same as competing, right? It's easy to look at yourself in the mirror and say, oh man, I probably fucked that up and I'm pissed at myself, but different to be coaching somebody and then watch them make a silly mistake. And then you're frustrated and you're angry, but it's not you. You don't really have control of it. You just have to figure out how to articulate it and talk about it and hopefully learn from the experience.
Ben's dad, Glenn, was actually my coach for a little while. Glenn Thompson.
Yeah.
I asked him on a podcast once if he'd ever heard of Bill Bowerman as an engineer of human performance. And he never really thought of it that way. But did you ever think of your role as an engineer of human performance kind of in the same sense?
I think maybe not. Yeah, I don't know if I would have used the term engineer, but I would say for sure, the more experienced I became, the more I realized I was more of a mental skills coach.
Yeah.
At the highest level than I was a technical coach.
Yeah.
And some of that, depending on the personality, is more of like a life skill coach. You know, how do you get yourself in the right place? How do you take a distraction away from somebody that potentially is going to affect their performance? And I think I recognized all that. I recognized, that being kind of the game-changing piece of ski racing at the highest level was the mental piece. And so I always kind of knew that even though I have a very, very small role there, that's maybe where I'd make more of a difference than anywhere else.
Was it viewed from that standpoint, or did you just kind of learn that along the way? Wasn't that scientific, I guess?
No, I would say that was learned along the way. As a coach, I was always able to sort of read people and understand people and create a team dynamic that was pretty positive. I think that was a strength of mine. But then to take that to the next level of looking at individuals and what does it take to get yourself in that place where where distractions are not a problem and where you're going to allow yourself to be who you can be. That took a little time to kind of fine tune that ability, I would say. I don't think nobody ever told me that. The science part, the engineering part of skiing for me was way more the equipment side. So I spent a lot of time with boots, trying to figure out boots and make sure boots were just right. Made a lot of changes with a lot of people on boots. And then sort of studying the science part of skiing. Like, where are you fast? Why are you fast? And then looking at the history of that and then trying to figure out solutions. So that was the science part for me, was the equipment, and then looking at sections of courses and figuring out how you can be fast. And then I'd say the coaching part was really more the mental piece, helping people get in that mental space where hopefully they're indestructible, at least for a couple minutes.
It's easy to give advice a lot of times, but it's often more helpful to kind of invert your thinking and avoid things. What's the worst advice you hear given to athletes, young athletes or athletes in general?
That's a good question. I guess I would say, I don't know if it would be advice, but more is not always better. And I think sometimes in sport nowadays, where everyone's becoming single discipline and single sport, and they're becoming almost hyper-focused on sport, I think they're kind of losing sight of the big picture. And I think almost anything worth doing, the whole sort of term, anything worth doing is worth overdoing, is bullshit. If you're going to do it right and make sure that you can get away from it so that you keep it in perspective. I think this notion that more is better, and that, if I ski 90 days during the summer, I'm going to be better than the guy that skis 80. And that's not necessarily the truth. The truth is, how do you figure out how to train intelligently, and how do you figure out how to get in a place where you really are willing to let go and, take risk when somebody else is not willing to take risks, and put the whole thing in perspective. Probably way more important than, just go out and more is better. You got to train harder and you got to do more. So I hear a lot of that and I don't always buy into it. So for me, when I hear that, I always kind of makes the hairs on my back stand up a little bit if I hear someone else say that.
Egos. How did you deal with egos? You dealt with a lot of super successful people. How did you work with that? How did you manage that?
Yeah, egos are interesting. I think, there's times when you have to massage and there's times when you have to call people out. And I think the most important thing about people with egos is they're still people. They're still normal people. And they might think their shit doesn't stink, but at the end of the day, I think one of the problems with people with huge egos is nobody wants to call them out, and people don't set any boundaries for them. So they end up just acting like asses, and they become selfish. They become really selfish. And so for me, I think dealing with people with egos is still about setting guidelines and setting boundaries, being clear with goal setting. I think one of the most important things you can do with people that have big egos is put them in the mix of where they're actually being held accountable to help somebody. And that changes the way they look at their own world when all of a sudden they're responsible for somebody else. And so that's usually what I did with people that have huge egos, is I just put them right in the mix and just say, you know what, you're doing dishes tonight, dude. And they'd be like, well, what the fuck? I'm the best guy here. And you're like, I don't give a shit. I don't give a shit who you are. And you see it, you know, it's like part of life. And there's coaches that have huge egos and athletes that have huge egos. And, you know, the other part of it too, though, is, you know, a lot of the greatest athletes I ever worked with, you know, you need to have a big ego. You need to be pretty friggin' proud of yourself, and you need to know that you can win. So there is a balance. You can't, just because somebody has a huge ego, you can't just beat them down and make them feel like shit.
Yeah,
it's more about just sort of managing it and teaching them a few other tools.
You skied all over the world. You've probably been to most hills out there. Do you have a favorite one?
I like a lot. My favorite place to free ski would be Le Grave, France. That was an amazing mountain. It's got a little bit of everything, and it's huge, and it's not highly developed, and it's just a little more raw.
Okay.
It could be really dangerous on a bad day. Could be amazing on a good day.
It's kind of like Revy.
Yeah.
You can be skiing off a cliff, or you can be on the green circle in a matter of minutes.
Yeah, I've skied Rev. It's a great spot. Great spot. Le Grave's even bigger. I think it's 7,000 vertical. It's huge.
Really?
Yeah.
What are you reading these days? I usually kind of wrap things up. I always ask what people are reading.
I was actually just reading a really interesting book on cowboys, buffaloes, and Indians on the American West. And it's basically a book. I can't remember. I don't have it right here with me. But the title is something like Fallacies of the American West. And it talks about the interaction between cowboys and Indians and buffaloes and U.S. government and where things went sideways and why they went sideways. And it's interesting. I would love to see more people read it just to hopefully learn more about interactions. It seems like we're at a time now in the world where, at least here in this country, it's way more polarized. People are a little bit more anxious. They're maybe a little more fearful. They're more angry. You know, sometimes it's hard to watch. Kind of remind myself that there's a lot of dipshits out there, and there's a lot of people with different mindsets. I try to always bring it back to realize that I think people are trying to do the right thing, and I want to try and give people a break, but they often disappoint me. So,
interesting.
But that's what I'm reading currently. It's pretty interesting. What are you reading?
I'm working my way through Neil Stephenson, Snow Crash, the metaverse. That's obviously a hot topic these days, so I thought I'd educate myself. I'm not sure if you're ever into sci-fi or not, Dune or any of those ones.
I've read Dune.
I usually ask people if they read Dune, and they haven't, but that's awesome.
Yeah, I like Dune. That's great.
I really appreciate your time. And
you're welcome. Have a great day.
Will do. Talk to you later, and maybe see you at Pano or something.
I look forward to it. Cheers.
Thank you.
Bye.
Hey, thanks for listening, everyone. Hopefully you enjoyed the episode. If you liked what you heard, check out roadsbros.ca, where we will have upcoming shows. You can also find our coffee and chocolate there, where we plant one tree for every bag or bar sold through our partnership with One Tree Planted, a cool not-for-profit organization focused on global reforestation. Until next time, happy coffee drinking.